Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's UK Customs Academy webinar, looking at Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, or CFSP. My name's Samantha Pelleggi, and I'll be on hand to facilitate any questions or queries you may have during this webinar. You can use the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions and send in comments at any point. The UK Customs Academy has been set up by KGH Customs Services and the Institute of Export and International Trade at the request of HMRC to enable individuals and businesses to gain the knowledge and skills around international customs that will be essential for trade in the years to come. I'm delighted to welcome our speaker today, Steve Cock, who is Senior Customs Consultant at KGH Customs Services. Hi, Steve. I hope you're well today.
Yes, very well. Yeah, very good.
Good. Just to let you know that a recording of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who's registered, so you can listen again in your own time. So without further ado, let's get on with today's webinar. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Welcome everyone who's, I'm sure some of you have been on these webinars before. This isn't quite as broad as some of the other ones that we've done in the past, things like tariff classification. It's quite a narrow subject, but hopefully we can give it some justice today. I suppose the question to a certain extent first off is why is CFSP going to be so important? And of course, the real reason at the moment is that Brexit is just about to happen, and there has to be a way to help the customs brokerage industry to deal with all of the additional imports and exports that are coming our way. So at the moment, it's well reported that there's about 50 million import-export declarations from the UK every year, and that's going to jump, we think, at least to 200 million, maybe 250 million. And so there has to be a means to make the volumes of declarations that are required, given that the intermediate sector, the people who do the customs declarations, brokers, there's about 47,000, I think, people in that industry at the moment. It's obviously a heck of a leap to get from a point of doing 50 million declarations to 200 million. And so as much as possible, customs would like companies to get involved themselves to make their own declarations. And that will become patently clear when we get partway through next year, when everybody's going to have to take care of their imports. So why the need? This is a photograph that was taken, I think, just about a week ago. It shows the new border inspection post at Ashford in Kent from the air. Effectively, this is Border Force and HMRC's flagship centre for managing the flow of goods through the Straits of Dover. And as you can see, it's far from finished. There is a neighbouring facility which is built on a new international truck stop, and they've got an option to keep that going until the end of October next year. And so there is provision, of course, for HMRC to handle clearances, but in the same way as there are arrangements as a result of Brexit where declarations won't be needed for the first 6 months of next year. There also has to be something when we get to that 6-month point to play catch up on the declarations that won't have been submitted, and also just to keep pace. So the need is really, to a very large extent, through things being underprepared for Brexit. So under the arrangements that have been announced by HMRC, there is going to be a blanket approval for the first 6 months of next year for all companies to be able to use entry in the declarant's records to record their importations. Exports is something entirely different. You have to still make an export declaration because that leads into an import into the EU, and that is a continuing requirement. But if you go back a couple of years, CFSP was the type of approval that if you wanted to get it from customs, you really had to try hard. You had to fully demonstrate that you knew the customs world inside out, certainly when it came to doing a declaration, classifying your goods, how you value the goods, all of those things. So to get a CFSP approval was quite a task. Added on to that, there is a variant of CFSP which we'll come to later called entry into the declarant's records, and effectively that allows you to make an import without telling customs anything much at the time you clear your goods. So it is in effect the absolute gold standard of the customs compliance. You would never ever get it unless you could demonstrate to customs that you were a reputable and trusted trader. Now, of course, that, because of Brexit, has gone by the wayside because HMRC do not have the ability to take all of these additional declarations that need to be made. And also, to be fair, industry is not in a reasonable place to actually make those declarations either. In the case of HMRC, the implementation of the new customs declaration system in place of Chief has not gone ahead successfully. And so there just has to be another way. And so everybody's going to be allowed to use entry into declarant's records. In other words, you make a record of the import yourself, and you're expected to be an honest citizen and declare it later. But most of those declarations are going to have to be made by CFSP, again, just because the sheer volume. So from the start of next year, for imports only, there will be no requirement to make a declaration until July the 1st. But once we get to that point, those declarations can be made by CFSP, and that can either be at the end of the month of arrival, or so you could do them if you wanted to in January, February, March, April. You could keep pace, or alternatively, you can do it on a 6-month rolling basis. And so imports in January you can take care of in July, and in March you can take care of in September. But you will need to have a CFSP approval if you're going to do it yourself, allow an agent to do it on your behalf, or work with an agent who's already CFSP approved. Alternatively, a full customs declaration could be made. But there are problems to do with that at the moment. Anyway, all of this is aimed at supporting the roll-on, roll-off market. If you've got imports coming through Felixstowe or Southampton containerized freight, then that will continue as normal. But the measures that they're bringing in for Brexit are really aimed at supporting roll-on, roll-off freight and the Channel Tunnel. If you are a non-UK resident company, and obviously there will be a lot of those that are looking to deliver into the UK, deliver duty paid to customers, a lot of the supermarkets, for instance, are requiring that their suppliers who are under deliver duty paid contracts continue to operate that way, and they're requiring their EU-based suppliers to make the declarations on their behalf. They can't be authorized for CFSP, and so they will need to have an agent acting on their behalf. But that's kind of setting the scene in terms of what Brexit's bringing us. But in terms of CFSP itself, there is a reasonable question to ask: is it a good idea or not? There's heavily split opinion on that within the brokerage industry. I've given you some examples on the left here of why it might be a good idea, and some others why it might not on the right. So it is true that it's very useful for importers that do not know what they will dispatch until the goods are ready to depart. Obviously, if you know a week in advance that a consignment's coming, so if you've got a shipment coming from China, you get a couple of weeks to determine what that import might look like, pre-lodge the declaration, and then it's ready there waiting for the goods. When we leave the European Union, the chances are that goods are going to be delivered on a pretty rapid basis. If you're taking a delivery from Belgium, France, for instance, it could well be that the truck leaves for the Channel Tunnel and arrives there within a couple of hours. At the beginning of the Brexit process, for the first 6 months, we won't have to have a pre-lodged import declaration in the UK to take care of that. But after the 6 months are over, you're going to have something waiting for us at the other end of the Channel Tunnel so that you can declare the goods inwards. And so if you're only having to provide a very limited amount of data, which is what CFSP is aimed at, if you're providing that at the outset, then it helps the person who's shipping to you, because they only have to tell you a very limited amount of data. I've got a list of that later. And The other thing is it can be a cost saving measure as well. So the main work to do with the declarations can be done whenever it's convenient to the company itself, or if it's using a broker, to the broker. And so if for instance, KGH were your broker and we had a lack of goods coming in on a Friday, which would be relatively common, we would have staff spare to actually process other declaration work at that time. And so we keep our costs down, and passing that on to the customer is obviously to be expected. And again, we're going to come on to that it's there are two declarations as part of this process. There's a simplified initial one and then a follow-up detailed one. So you could work with a broker who operates 24/7. You've got your goods coming through the Channel Tunnel all through the night, because clearly there are a lot of deliveries overnight. That's when the freight tends to come. You could employ a broker just to do the simplified declaration side of things for you. Very much cheaper, and then you could play catch up and do the full declaration afterwards. I mean, the other idea about it is CFSP is supposed to be more accurate, because you get the time to ensure that the goods that you're declaring are right. If you pick up on a short shipment or the shipment of additional goods, that can be taken into consideration. Invoices can be amended, that kind of thing. Then again, on the counterpoint, you have to handle data to do with each importation twice. And if you're the broker itself, that might not be the way that you want to manage things. You have to make an initial declaration, then you have to match up the supplementary declarations with that. Equally, you could argue that it's less likely to be accurate, not more likely, because you're taking time over getting the declarations in. Things can be missed. There's no jeopardy, to a certain extent, that the goods might be checked on import against documentation, because even if they were, they are subject to change, and so that might relax things. But particularly in relation to this 6-month Brexit declaration holiday, clearly things might be forgotten and go missing. So there's a lot to say whether it's good or bad. And so if you do go down the path of deciding you want to do CFSP, I would suggest that you take a long, hard look at it before you do so. So in terms of the actual process itself, eligibility, most imported goods can be bought in under CFSP. There's things like excisable goods that there's a problem with. I'll come on to that at the end. Also, certain procedures have been excluded from what can be used. So, for instance, goods arriving under community transit or going out under community transit, they would be excluded, because you're required to actually make the export declaration at the time before you can start a community transit procedure. So it's not all encompassing, and as a result, not every customs procedure code is available to use within CFSP. In general terms, it's the main duty reliefs and imports exports. So the actual authorization process, again, as I mentioned before, if you turn back the clock a little, what you had was a very complex authorization process. In effect, you were applying to something very much akin to authorized economic operator. And for those who haven't come across that if there is a gold standard of customs compliance, that would be the platinum standard. It's basically a company declaring to customs how it will manage all its customs activities to the point, hopefully, where it doesn't do anything wrong, or if it does, it will find it and it will report it to customs. So the authorization process was on a level akin to that. So the first thing to say, to actually be able to use it, even though we're entering the Brexit period of 6 months where everybody's going to be allowed to use this entry into declarants records, which is a facet of CFSP, to actually then go on to make a declaration, you have to be authorized to operate it. And the application form has just been amended. It was a real beast before. It was 10 pages long with 10 pages of notes attached to it. And customs have promised to simplify it. It's still, I think, 10 pages long, but it is, the font size has got a lot bigger, and it's more about ticking boxes rather than filling out lots and lots of information. But at the same time, when you used to submit the application, you had it followed up by a very long questionnaire asking you how you would set up your processes and how you would manage things. You don't have to do that after putting in the application, but now you have to supplement the application with a document that explains basically the things that you had to do before. So you have to provide information on how you manage things, your financial situation, things like that. So lockdown and Brexit have simplified the process further in the past, you would expect to receive an audit from an officer as part of the approval process. We hosted one not long before lockdown, and Customs turned up and there were 5 of them. To be fair, most of them were trainees learning on the job because they're swelling their ranks for Brexit. But nevertheless, there was a real hard attitude that if you can't demonstrate that what you're doing is right, you cannot get CFSP. And that probably will come back. But at the moment, it's a very much more, it's just loose arrangement. And the last one that we were involved in, which is actually before this new form has come out, the last ones we were involved in was via a conference call. So you arranged up to about a 3-hour call it's scheduled for, and Customs pull apart the application that you've submitted, asking any questions that they like, and then you get to provide further justification of what's required after that. So it's still, you can still expect it to be a relatively labor-intensive process, but it's nothing like what it was. Requirements. So theoretically, at least, the applicant must have had a proven record of financial solvency for 3 years prior to the application for CFSP. I know for a fact that there are companies out there who have not existed for 3 years who have got CFSP approval. KGH in the UK set up as part of the lead up to Brexit. We're a Scandinavian, North European country, Germany and Austria, that kind of area. But KGH set up in the UK less than 3 years ago, and we are CFSP approved. So it definitely can happen if you're less than 3 years old. But what you must be able to still demonstrate is that you have a good record of compliance with Customs. And that would be in relation to things like Intrastat submissions, VAT returns, duty deferment, pretty much everything that you do. Having said that, again, I suspect because of the emergency nature of having to make all of these declarations, I suspect that there will be a little laxity in that as well. But if you've had penalties from HMRC, then you shouldn't expect to be able to get an approval. In addition, if you're going to get CFSP, you have to have all of the authorizations that go hand in hand with what you're doing to be able to make the application. So if you're using inward processing, if that's part of your application, you're going to use an inward processing customs procedure code, then you need to have the inward processing approval before you go down this path. So on the actual application form, you can look it up. It's if you just put CFSP application, it'll bring up a C&E 48 form. Like I say, the old version was very detailed. This one's not too bad, but when you look at it, I have to say, for the uninitiated, it really does look like oh my Lord, what am I doing? Especially when you get to the information at the tail end. It starts easy and it gets harder. But anyway, you have, obviously you have to put your details in, the details of the applicant. Any agents that are going to be used to clear the goods, you have to have a duty deferment account to be able to declare goods through CFSP. You can't do it in any other way. And so you must have a deferment account number to be able to post on the application. Now that doesn't have to be your own. If you're working with a freight agent, you could, and you're typically going to use their deferment account number, you can ask them for their number and put it on the application. Also, as part of the Brexit simplification process, it was the case that if you wanted a duty deferment account, you had to set up a bank guarantee, and that meant you had to have a comprehensive customs guarantee application in place. That is no longer the case. You can get a deferment account quite quickly, but it's very limited in the amount of money that you can declare against it. which in some ways is quite good because you can put the number on your application form. But then later on, when you come into the application form where you're telling customs how much tax you might be deferring, obviously then the two might not tie up. But you could put your deferment account number on there if you have to get your own, and you could do an accompanying letter by saying, here's our number, which we're seeking to up the amount of our deferment account by putting in place a comprehensive customs guarantee. To get the comprehensive customs guarantee, it's probably a couple of months to get it from start to finish. So duty deferment account would be quicker without that. Anyway, you need a deferment account number on there. Probably best if you ask your agent to put theirs on there. Then you have to put the nature of the application. So is it going to be a simplified declaration procedure? I'm coming on to that. Or enter into the declarant's records. You have to estimate the number of transactions per year, estimate the potential taxes due per year, and then it starts to get a bit cumbersome. As I say, for the uninitiated, you have to put your entry processing requirements, things like the ports that you might be seeking to use. Anyway, you'll find guidance online of how to fill that out. So as I say, this is effectively an AEO level approval. And so the application, when you submit it, you have to put in this supporting document. And in that, you should describe a series of things, including the following. So you've got to be able to maintain a set of documented procedures that accurately describe what you're doing. So it's not just sufficient that you write a book of instructions and then park it somewhere. Effectively, you're writing an organic document that as your procedures change, the document changes. And also, if you're putting in there that so-and-so has to check a particular action, say they have to check the classification of goods, then you need some way to evidence it, because when customs come along in a couple of years' time, which they probably will once they're fully up to speed, they'll want to see how you've been controlling your AEO approval. And of course, if you do control it, then you won't make mistakes, or hopefully won't make mistakes, and you get to keep it. If you are found wanting and that you have made a number of errors, and then those don't get put right, or it's material in terms of you've underpaid duty, then your CFSP approval stands to be taken away from you. Anyway, so you have to have things like the structure and the internal controls within your business. You have to have how the audit trail is maintained, how you follow the goods from the point that you order them to the point that you've cleared them for customs purposes. So in other words, to the point where customs no longer care about what happens. But then, of course, what happens if you're making claims under a warranty? If you're making claims under a warranty, well, the value of the goods may have reduced and you might be entitled to a duty refund. So to a certain extent, a lot of it can be all-encompassing about what your business does. You have to maintain the security and archiving of your documentation. All too readily, companies do not maintain copies of their import-export documents. You've got to keep them for years. So you have to explain how you're going to do that. You've got to explain the procedures for making customs declarations, how you interact with the customs agents that you use, how you classify your goods, how you value them for customs purposes, how you determine the origin, particularly if you're working in a free trade agreement, which hopefully we all will be. But I mean, how do you justify either the origin of your goods or the origin of the goods that are coming to you? And then how do you look after irregularities? You have to be seen to be proactive in determining if things go wrong. And if they do, you've got to be very proactive in ensuring that you make a voluntary declaration if you've underpaid duty, or seek to recover it if you've overpaid, or just other compliance issues, that you do bring those to the attention of HMRC. So it is quite detailed. But at the end of the day, compliance will be the name of the game. I mean, it should be anyway in terms of dealing with customs. But they are very big on this in terms of, if you have an AEO approval or a CFSP approval, you have to have a nominated individual within the organization. And if that person changes, you have to tell customs, because if they're looking to hang the hook on somebody, if something goes wrong, they need to know who to go to. So you have to tell them things like, if you change the business name, the premises, these things that are included on your approval, if they change, you must notify them. And you must notify things like significant alterations in your business pattern. If you are going to make more imports than you thought you might, if you're going to bring in different types of product, because of course, if change can bring errors, and so you need to keep customers up to speed on that. If you change your record keeping systems, if you've told them how you're going to maintain your secure storage of import documents, and that's in cardboard boxes in a lockup somewhere, and overnight you decide, no, we're going to scan the whole lot to PDF and somebody's going to host it online, you have to tell them. And again, if there are errors, you've got to report them, and there is a thing called a final supplementary declaration that we're coming on to, and you can report errors in that. So security, there is an absolute requirement to guarantee the duty that is going to be suspended. So you're using a duty deferment account, therefore you have to make sure that you've got sufficient limit within that account to cover the goods that you're going to import. So you have to provide security through a bank or through an insurance company linked to your comprehensive customs guarantee, unless you're very low volume, in which case you can make do with the one that customs will provide effectively to anyone for free with a guarantee waiver. But I think the limit is about £10,000 a month. It's not high. You must monitor to make sure that you're not going to breach the level of your guarantee. If you are, you need to make alternative arrangements. Borrow your freight agent's guarantee for a little bit. And if you find that the security is insufficient, you've got to take efforts to increase it, or like I say, find another way around it. So the duty deferment is an absolute requirement. You've got to do it through a duty deferment account. It can be your own account or it can be that of your agent, so that's fine. But even though there are changes as a result of Brexit to the system, you will still almost certainly need a comprehensive customs guarantee. And as that takes at least a month or so to get, probably two, it's obviously a little late in the day to get it now in time for Brexit. But given that we've got this 6-month window next year, you can still get a comprehensive guarantee, you can still get a duty deferment account, and you can still get a CFSP approval well before the 1st of July. So you might be late in the day, but it's still possible. So I mentioned before, it's a 2-stage declaration process. There's the initial freight message, that is just a limited burst of information, and then there is a supplementary declaration at month end that provides all of the information necessary for the customs declaration. So the simplified frontier declaration is basically sticking a pin in to say to customs, well, we bought some goods in, can we have an import reference number to report against later on? And so you provide a very limited amount of information. It's called a simplified frontier declaration, SFD, has to be submitted into Chief electronically. And then it leads on to the simplified declaration procedure afterwards. So the information that you need to record in the simplified frontier declaration is listed here. And I've color coded it. So the stuff in green is likely to be the same all the time. And so you don't have to worry too much about that. Declaration type, is it an import? It could be an export, but is it an import? Declaration code. If it's C, that's CFD, goods arrived. Consignees, the ORI number, and so on. There are only a few things that will change. The things in blue might change, so you might come through a different port. You might put on there package marks and types if you're being very detailed. Most people aren't. They'll just put something very basic and keep it the same all the time. Description, again, you could keep that very, very basic. Wheat or car parts, whatever it is you're importing. So it's only really the total number of packages. Then you have to give it a unique reference number of your own. And then, of course, the place probably stays the same, but the date of the declaration will change. So it is very, very limited. And that's the beauty of it. You can ship goods out from a bakery in Belgium, 12 midnight. You didn't know what was particularly coming until the lorry was loaded. And then en route, this can be lodged and get the goods into the UK as quick as you like. Then on the other side of the thing, there's entry into declarants records. This is what we're all going to be doing next year, or most people are. And that is extremely limited in terms of the data. You have to file a safety and security declaration. You have to anyway to get the goods out of continental Europe. But on top of that, you basically don't tell them anything. You're just recording that information in your records. Can't be used for entry into declarants records, can't be used for everything. free circulation goods, customs warehousing, inward processing, the major duty reliefs it can be, and for export. You can't use it for things like temporary storage, onward supply relief, that's to do with VAT, but the real thing you can't use it for is transit. And transit is going to be a really big deal when we leave the European Union. Not so much necessarily for import transit, but for those of you who are involved in exports as well as imports, and if you're exporting through France on the way to other member states of the EU, and you haven't considered transit, for goodness sake, look up transit now, because it's not really being reported in the media, but about 80% of all goods going out from the country will be going out under transit, and it's complicated. So my advice would be to look into transit. But as I said before, entry into declaration records is the ultimate trust that that customs can provide. So if you want to maintain entry into declarants records the other side of the 1st of July, you're really going to have to demonstrate to customs that you are fully compliant. And so the procedures that you submit along with your application are going to have to be very detailed. Supplementary declarations, so you've either made your simplified fronted declaration or your wave through with your EIDR. The supplementary declaration, this is where you're making the full month-end report of everything that would go in a standard declaration. So again, it must be submitted electronically by chief. But of course, if you are the company that's doing the import yourself and you don't have the wherewithal to go 24/7 and make sure that you're there to deal with any hiccups that might happen in the import process, then this is a perfect way that you can do your own declarations. You can get a software package. This can be provided by online suppliers, and you can go in and make your supplementary declarations yourself. It's about 28 data elements. A lot will be exactly the same every time. Who you are, who supplied you the goods, various things like that. Other things you would need to know, the registration number of the vehicle that's delivering the goods to you. That's one thing. You have to know the value, the classification, all the regular things that you would have to know. But generally, you'll probably find that only 8, 9, or 10 items are changing for each import. So it is very doable. You can do supplementary declaration work yourself. So, as I say, the supplementary declaration contains similar data to the full SAD, the full import declaration that you would do if you were pre-lodging a full declaration. You can also aggregate your data if you choose to. It may just be as easy to report line by line all the things that you've imported, but if you had a mind to, and the base information to do with the declaration, so the date of import, who it's come from, where it's been delivered to, that kind of thing. If all the base data remains the same and things like the classification is the same, you can aggregate all of the value against one classification and therefore reduce the amount of data that you're sending in. So the timing of the whole thing. So you are given time to put your supplementary declarations in, but they have to be done by the 4th working day of the month following the import. So if you're importing in January, by the 4th of February, you have to have submitted all supplementary declaration information. So obviously, as you go along through the month, you probably, rather than do it all in one go, want to pepper customs every few days with declaration information. And then by the 4th working day of the month following, you want to get the last of that data in, because after that, you're going to be hit with a duty bill through your deferment account on the 15th day, not the 15th working day, the 15th day of the month following the import. The final thing is there is a final supplementary declaration, and this is just to prove to customs that you've got everything taken care of. So you submit one of these authorized EORI. So if you're a company working for yourself, you'll have your EORI covering your imports, so you would put in one of these. Again, you put it in by the 4th working day of the month following the reporting period. And on this, you basically show the number of supplementary declarations that you've submitted. So it's a summary to say, I should have sent you 100, and if you check back, you'll find hopefully that I did send you 100. But you can also use it to report late declarations from previous period. So you don't play catch up during the normal submission in February. If you missed something in January, you would put it in at this point. And if you didn't do anything, you have to put in a nil return, because otherwise customs might come chasing you down for the one that you should have put in and you haven't. Representation, direct indirect representation will be important, particularly if you're a non-UK based company. So there are a lot of EU-based companies that would like to make use of CFSP. That isn't going to be possible in their own name, but they can use a representative to do that. So in terms of direct representation, this is where the third party, so somebody like KGH, who has their own CFSP approval, would act on behalf of and in the name of the importer. So if we're working on a UK-based company's behalf, we can act as their direct representative, because if something goes wrong, customs can go knocking on their door and ask for the money. Obviously, if they're based in the European Union, that will no longer be possible. And so those companies would have to have indirect representation. So the authorized importer is responsible for any customs debt. So the company that would be working with the UK company, they're liable for all the taxes no matter what happens. But as I said, companies based in the EU and the UK at the moment can use that system. But once we've left the EU, that will no longer be the case for the EU-based companies. So they will have to use indirect representation, and at that point the agent of course becomes equally liable for the duty that that is due. So if duty is deferred at the end of the month, you'll have a situation possibly where a company goes bust, and that leaves the agent having to pick up the bill for their client. And that does happen. And so when a broker takes on a company under indirect representation, they have to think long and hard about it. And they will carry out all sorts of checks and make sure that they're financially sound. But anyway, when we leave the European Union proper, EU companies will have to use indirect representation. So there are some goods that are outside the scope of the CFSP. So third country excise goods are outside, other than alcohol and related goods like perfume. Tobacco, hydrocarbon oils are excluded from CFSP. And the same is true if it's UK excise goods as well. You've also got personal effects. If people are moving their home here and they've got all of their goods in a 40-foot container, then that would be excluded as well. So that's really bringing you to the end of the presentation. I'm sorry, in a way, it was a bit of a cavalry charge to get there. I know we've got some questions building up, and I wanted to make sure that we cover that. But what I would say to you is, I know that quite a few of you would have got grant funding from government to allow you to take part within the UK Customs Academy. It may well be that you've done the course that you wanted to, and you're thinking of doing the next one in the series. If that is the case, I would urge you to seek to make a grant application as soon as you can. The last grant that was set out was for £50 million. We understand that is just about to run out. It could well be that it is topped up again. It has been topped up once before. So we're fairly hopeful that it will be topped up next year. But when it was topped up last time, there was a real lag of a month or more, I think, between the new money coming on stream. So I would suggest if you wanted to sign up for another course, you've pretty much got a week or so to do that, but maybe not even that. Okay, like I say, I'm grateful for you listening, and it was a bit of a charge to get to the end. But Sam, I think you might have some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Steve. I hope everyone found that presentation useful. We do have quite a few questions that have come through already, so we'll get started on those. First of all, first question, I thought that the new CFSP application was going to be very simplified. Why is it still so detailed? And linking into that, there's a secondary question which says, if you have AEO already, is the application process shortened at all?
Okay, when we heard that HMRC were going to limit the application, there was a rumor, I don't know if it was generated by HMRC or whether it was just a rumor, that it was going to be a one-page application almost. And that in the same way as transitional simplified procedure had been issued when Brexit nearly happened the first time round, that this would be very much a rubber stamping exercise and companies would be given the approval only to have it taken away from them later if they failed to comply with their obligations. It appears in all of this that Treasury then has a hand in the background and dissuades customs from going quite as far as it would want because it has to secure tax. And so from the look of it, I suspect that they've wanted to try and ensure that companies think long and hard about how they will properly account for it. So yes, there is still a fairly lengthy application. I must admit the last few pages I do not like at all. I think they're very difficult for the uninitiated to fill out. The fact that you have to provide the system of how you're going to control things, the point about AEO, I have an approval already, well, effectively, you can almost, I would suggest, hand over your AEOC approval, if that's what you've got the compliance one, because it will tell customs how you classify goods, how you value goods, how you control goods on import. And I would suspect that if you tell them that you're AEOC approved, you almost will walk straight into a CFSP approval. And I doubt very much that you would even have to have a telephone interview, but that's just guessing. Okay.
Great, thank you. Next question, what will happen after Brexit? Can we expect an audit from HMRC anytime soon? Again, that kind of links to another question that we've had, or a statement that says that somebody made an inquiry or a request with HMRC, still ongoing 3 weeks later with no confirmation despite chasing. HMRC response time to queries is weeks currently.
Yeah, okay, so sorry, Sam, I was concentrating on the second question. What was the first one again?
Sorry, is what will happen after Brexit? Can we expect
yes.
an audit from HMRC anytime soon?
Yeah, okay, so I used to work for Customs a fair few years ago, and there used to be, I think, over 1,000 what were called inland customs officers that would go out and visit companies. They got whittled away over the years while we were in the EU, and they weren't really replaced. And so the older staff are all reaching retirement age now, and a lot have just left. So not only had they reduced staff numbers, they had reduced, experienced staff. And so there's a real push to bring on new team members and train them up. So will you expect an audit? I think you will eventually, but I think that will be a long time in coming. And it'll be done on a risk basis. So if you're a big company paying lots of duty, you can expect an earlier visit rather than a later one. If you're a small company, I wouldn't say you will not get one, because theoretically they should do it every 3 years, because they can only go back 3 years if you've underpaid by mistake. But yeah, you should expect one. In terms of customs and responding to inquiries, well, I mean, it's the worst time possible. It's almost like when you do a self-assessed tax return. If you try and phone customs at that point, they're going to be very long in coming back to you. We're coming up to Brexit, and not surprisingly, they are weeks doing the simplest inquiries. Also, if you're chasing up an approval, you're just getting standard bounce back messages of, we have 120 days to process this, we'll come back to you. But of course, if they're dealing with all of those inquiries all the time, where is it, where is it, where is it? It doesn't really leave them the time to do the actual work. So I guess to a certain extent, I would say bear with them. But yeah, not perfect. There's a lot available online, of course, they would always point to.
Great, thank you. Next question, do both the broker and client have to be CFSP approved?
No, okay, so it's quite an odd one in a way. So if I'm KGH, I'm a broker that has its own approval. I can work with somebody and allow them to import under my approval. And at the end of each month, I have to take care of the supplementary declaration and submit that. And that's fine. If I were doing an application as a company for myself, I have to explain exactly what I'm doing in terms of my record keeping and let customs know that. So now if we go back to me as KGH doing other people's work, I've told them how I'm going to do my declarations, and then I take on a new client. And so it beholds me now to go back to my new client and say, well, how are you going to take care of your tariff classifications? How are you going to build up the value of your goods? Because at some point, I as an agent are going to be audited for the accuracy of the information that I'm getting from them. And if I've got no system documentation in place to show, one, that I checked with them, and two, what their processes are, then I could be in trouble. So the answer is only one person needs to be, because that number will appear on the declaration. But it's a problematic area for declarants. If I work for 100 companies and customs found me to be wanting in 2 or 3 of them, for instance, that they were doing something wrong, theoretically I could lose my whole approval and my business. And so, like I say, it does behold me to check up on what my client is doing. In effect, I'm taking on the audit role of HMRC. So if I'm an indirect representative for a Belgian company, HMRC aren't going to be able to go over there and audit them. So they're going to rely on me to make sure that my client is providing me with good information. Anyway, so it's one person, but in either circumstance, somebody needs to be presenting all the processes and making sure that everything works well.
Thanks, Steve. So what will an agent need to onboard an EU-based company for indirect representation?
It depends on the agent. I would suggest it depends how diligent they are. I mean, at the moment, you're entering a period where agents are running around like mad things, trying to make sure that they know what goods are coming their way, what the formatting of invoices and other documents will be, to make sure they can actually raise a declaration for their clients, let alone making sure that the process around how the information in that declaration might get there. So you will get people who are fairly blasé about it and won't do more than the very basics. In other words, can I have your invoice? That'll do me. At the same time, you'll get ones like, so for instance, KGH, if we were taking you on, we're AEO approved, we value our CFSP approval. And so if we take you on under our umbrella, we need to make sure that we know your system. So we have an onboarding process that is almost the same as a CFSP application. It does have the advantage that we already know how we go about making the declaration, so that's fine. But we do need to know how the company is going to gather and provide its data to us. Of course, by doing that, it means that it makes life easier in the long run. It's just at the moment, life's quite tough. And to require that of everybody you're onboarding is, again, tough. So maybe to a certain extent, we'll be playing catch up. But yeah, the real answer is it should be detailed, but whether it is another matter.
Okay, thank you. Then we have another question, which is, we import wine and were told that it was out of scope. Has this changed?
No, I believe that the EU, sorry, wine from outside the UK. So you couldn't clear out of a UK vineyard or something like that where it's being produced. But my understanding is for alcohol, it's within the scope of CFSP.
Okay, thank you. Can you use another way to declare EIDR imports in 2021, or do you have to become authorized for CFSP?
No, you can. Well, firstly, you could turn around to an agent who is CFSP approved, and they could do it on your behalf that way. Equally, you could just lodge a full declaration. There's nothing to stop you doing that. If you were to do it via a broker, then again, cost comes into it. I mean, it may well be that you could say to a broker, I want full declarations for all of these goods, and they would give you a piece price for those declarations. Equally, you could line yourself up with declarant software and do that work yourself. CFSP is probably still going to be the cheaper option, and I think you'll find that pretty much every agent out there will be CFSP approved. If they're not now, then they will be by the 1st of July next year.
Okay. Can a Dutch-based company with a GB EORI number use direct representation after Brexit, or would this need to be indirect?
If you look at a lot of what's online with HMRC at the moment, and this is why, to a certain extent, not getting it from the horse's mouth through their inquiry centre is problematic. If you look at their website, they have a lot of things that say what will happen on the 1st of January 2021, and it is incomplete. And so there are a lot of times where they miss out the fact that, for instance, I think it says if you want a duty deferment account, it says you will have to be UK based. But there are other things like if you want an inward processing approval, at the moment you can be UK or EU based. If you're an American company, for instance, you can't get it unless it's for non-commercial, like charitable purposes. So it should be the case that anybody who's an EU entity falls outside the whole system. So any interaction you have with HMRC would have to be on the basis that you are a legal entity on your own right, or that you secure representation for yourself. So in other words, that Dutch company, UK EORI, fine, they require indirect representation, no way around it.
Okay, thank you. Next question we have is, under current rules, an agent may not use their CFSP authorization if goods are to be cleared under IP. Is this still the case that an IP authorization holder must use their own CFSP authorization?
I'm going to have to pass on that one, I'm afraid. It sounds quite possible, but I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Okay. Next one then. We've always done full declarations. We also have inward processing and awaiting approval on outward processing. How can we benefit from CFSP?
Well, I mean, it comes down to a matter of choice, doesn't it? It's whether or not it fits well within your organization in terms of how and when you want to make the declaration, or more particularly when. But I would suggest everything in life comes down to cost. And so if you do a lot of imports and you want to go to the trouble of being trained to make declarations yourself, you may well find that you probably would want more than one staff member capable, but train 2 or 3 people to be able to make the declarations. Maybe that is a much cheaper option than paying a broker. I mean, typically an import declaration, 30, 40, 50 pounds. So if you can save that on every import, maybe you just use a broker for the frontier declaration, which might cost you £5 or £7.50, something like that. So I would suggest it's money over and above anything that would direct your choice whether to use CFSP or not.
Okay, great. And there's a question, can a company import goods under transit and use CFSP at the same time?
Yeah, I think the answer is going to be no. And the reason for that is, for those who aren't aware, transit is where you are moving goods within the EU across a non-EU country. So from Germany to France through Switzerland, for instance, or what we're going to be doing a heck of a lot of, moving goods from the UK through France and on to, say, Germany. You wouldn't be able to do that readily without making the import into France, and then you have to become French VAT registered. It's all a pain. If you're moving under transit, the transit has to be cleared when you get to your destination. The guarantee has to be cleared. So when you're moving, you're saying, if I've got £100,000 worth of clothing, for instance, there's potential for 21% VAT as I go through Belgium, 12% in duty on those goods. So I'm going to have to guarantee 33%, so £33,000 worth of guarantee in place. And you need to release that as soon as you can at the other end, so it can be recycled into the system and used by somebody else. And so for that reason, if you're declaring at month end, making a full declaration, that gets in the way of transit. So no, if you're using transit, you should, you can still use, you should use a full declaration, basically.
Okay, great. And then we have, can EU-based companies gain a CFSP approval or at least obtain a duty deferment account when they work with their agent's approval?
No. So again, duty deferment, comprehensive customs guarantee, all of those things stand by you being a UK-based company after Brexit. So no, unfortunately not.
Okay, great. Well, I think on that note, we're going to wrap up. We're rapidly approaching the hour mark. At this point, I'd like to thank Steve for the presentation and answers, and just remind you once again that if you are looking to apply for any additional training, that grants are still available, but we do advise that you apply sooner rather than later. If you've got any further questions or queries, please do let us know. Also, if you have any further suggestions for future topics for webinars, do let us know as well. But for now, from me and Steve, goodbye and stay safe. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.